Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you, and welcome to the second season of BHF Talks, a Bashar Holy Foundation brought to you by the Melbourne Cricket Club. My guest today is a journalist, lawyer, and university professor, and he does a really good impression of Nazim Hussain, at least according to non-people of colour. Waleed Aly, welcome to the podcast.
Assalamu alaikum, thank you very much for having me. It's a very kind introduction.
Alhamdulillah, man. I like to start every podcast with kind of throwing it back to, I'm not sure how many years ago this is for you, and I don't want to offend you, but 15-year-old Waleed.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so before we, speak about the present, let's talk about the past. Obviously, the path to the current Waleed. So what was 15-year-old Waleed like? What were his aspirations? What did he do for fun?
That's a really good question. 15's what, year 9?
Yeah, would be 8, 9.
Yeah, what was I doing? So around that time, that was actually the year my brother got married. So he's 10 years older than me.
Oh, wow.
So that was a big moment because he moved out and I felt like I was on my own because my parents came from Egypt and my brother, being so much older than me, was like having another parent, but he was a parent who grew up here.
Yeah.
And so him going was like, that was a massive deal for me. So actually it's a quite significant year.
Yeah, right.
I remember that.
Yeah, I knew that, by the way.
Yeah, I know. It's amazing. Your research is extraordinary.
Yeah, ridiculous.
So I remember that. And then as for what I wanted to do, I think that was around the time that being a lawyer started to take hold.
Okay.
A lot of people told me that I should be a lawyer.
Okay, right. Is it one of those where you talk a lot?
So yeah, I think it was. I think it was like you're argumentative and you talk too much. So just shut up and be a lawyer so we can hate you over there. I think it was probably that. But
put it to good use.
But I was interested in that. I reckon that was around the time as well that Spike Lee's Malcolm X movie came out. Oh, wow. And I reckon I remember when I saw that, it was either year 8 or year 9, so it might have been 14-year-old me, but anyway, around the same time. I remember being really taken by that.
Social impact.
Yeah, and I just found him such a magnetic character. And of course, I think he means something different to me and to a lot of Muslims than what he means to other people who even people who care about race politics, because he, in the end, becomes a Muslim, like a Sunni Muslim, after going for Hajj. So I think I was interested in his whole journey, I think, including the end bit, which is the bit I think a lot of people just forget about. They're interested in the radical bit before it, but not necessarily the end. Yeah. But anyway, so I remember seeing that movie, and it's such a long movie. It's like 3+ hours, and it has an intermission, or it did when I saw it, intermission in the middle of it, which I'd never seen before in a movie. It's just like, what do you mean? We just stop and...
in the cinema?
Yeah.
Oh.
It's like we go out and get Coke or something now. That seems like a weird thing to do. Anyway, all these things were really vivid.
Okay.
And I remember how excited I was about that film. And I had one of those. Around that time, it became quite a fashion item, like a cap with the X on it.
Yeah.
It was and I remember having one of those. It was like white with like a black pinstripe. Still remember. Yeah, these are the sort of weird patchwork things that come together.
Sounds like a very interesting year of your life.
Well, I guess so, yeah. There was a lot going on now that I think about it.
Yeah.
But I don't think the idea of being, like working in media or anything was a big deal at that time.
Not on the cards.
I remember being interested in that when I was 10. And I thought, I want to be a journalist. And I remember... It was around the time, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, the basketball player. He came out to Australia with a team of retired NBA players, and they played the Boomers. And I remember going to that game. I was blown away by it, and I recorded it, and went home and watched it, and then I wrote like a match report, handwritten on a pad of some sort, that sort of thing. Yeah. So that was around then. But then I sort of lost that. I just sort of gave up on that for some reason, and then. Yeah, so by the time I was 15, it was probably more about the law, and then, which of course, I ended up doing for a little while. Yeah. But that's years. That's not the year you asked about. So
we'll get to the law. I want to ask. You do a lot of different roles in a few different positions. How do you go about balancing your day? I know you don't really have a daily routine, so to speak, but what's kind of like a day in your life like?
It's pretty mad. Some actually, you know what? It's very up and down. Some days are really relaxed. I'll have a morning where there's just nothing on, and I might have a work meeting at 10 a.m. that goes for half an hour or something. But apart from that, my day kind of starts in earnest around 2 if it's a work day.
Yeah.
But so some days it's like that. Other days, like today, it's just one thing after another.
Yeah.
I did an interview earlier this morning for this thing I wrote. Now I'm here, and there's a meeting after this, and there's another meeting after that. It's just one of those sort of days. So I have those sort of things. But I think what I try to do, I guess it helps that a lot of my work has ended up focusing on things that I was at least kind of interested in anyway. So, I was the kind of person who was interested in news and was interested in politics. And so I ended up with a job where I had to be. I'm hugely into sport. I think it was 2014 I started doing Offsiders on the ABC, so I had to be across all that sort of stuff, including sports that I wasn't really following and whatever. So I guess I kind of made my interest my job, which is a good and a terrible thing at the same time.
Yeah.
Because it also makes your interest your job.
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, I remember when I first got into doing the media professionally.
Yeah.
It somehow mars it as a personal interest. Whereas you stop kind of seeing it as your hobby and seeing it as a job and wanting to excel or not having as much fun with it.
Yeah, it's funny. Yeah. I've spoken to a lot of footy journos through my life, and what's really interesting is watching the way that they're so much less passionate about their own team than they used to be, which they kind of have to be for professional reasons, but also just naturally happens because now they're inside the industry. They know the players and the coaches and whatever, and it ceases to be about the jumpers it's like these are people and it's an industry. And I remember looking at that going, oh, that's really sad. Because one of the things that I love about footy is being a fan, right? That's what's so great about it. Now, that doesn't mean I wouldn't ever want to, do sports media, for example. Like that could, if that happened one day, I wouldn't not do it because
you want to be
I want to be a fan.
Yeah.
But something's lost, in that process. So anyway, this is veering away from your question about what my day's like, but it's kind of relevant because I guess my day, I kind of have a 24-hour job in a way, but that's also because it's kind of vacuumed up so many of my interests that
Do you have your points of interest that you might want to speak about on the show as notifications on your phone? Is that 24/7, or do you kind of like to switch off?
See, I don't do social media.
But I mean, just news apps on your.
I don't do it with notifications, but I'll just check news sites or whatever if I need to. But it's not just news, right? So, for example, I do broadcast work, but also I do a lot of writing. There's the academic stuff. So, what that means is I kind of have to be engaged with ideas and read stuff that is beyond news, because it's not just about what's happening today or tomorrow or yesterday. It's also about much bigger ideas that I'll have to be playing with my whole life, right? So, for example, you would know this yourself, rather. So, even as a sports journalist, right? Say you want to be a commentator on any sport, right? Yeah. There's following each play, but then there's having a sense of what's happening in the world of sport generally, or what makes a great coach across eras, or whatever. Like, if you've got that kind of knowledge, then that will inform the way that you see things that happen in a game, or things that happen in the world of that particular sport all the time. It's a similar sort of idea to that.
No, it makes sense. In 2007, you wrote a book called People Like Us. And in the second chapter, you talk about how the West's attitude towards Islam has been shaped by a misunderstanding of what Islam is about.
Yeah.
How do you think that's shifted in the 15 years or so since you wrote that book?
I don't know that it has necessarily. I think it's...
Yeah, I'll probably go
on with that. Well, I think what's changed is emphasis and priorities, right? So climate change came along, and that sort of displaced a lot of the concern. I mean, that book was written around a time where Muslims and Islam were like probably the biggest issue in public discourse, right?
Public enemy number one.
Yeah. And then, you know, that sort of slowly changed. Climate change came along, then it came back because you had ISIS emerge in Iraq and Syria, and then that sort of went away again, and other things kind of, you know, we've had it, and also even something like Christchurch, I think, changed a lot of that because I don't know if you've noticed, but I certainly have, that after that, the politics, you know, using Muslims as raw material for politics sort of stopped after that, I think, because Christchurch made it difficult to do that without that being associated in some way.
I think for the first time we became a public victim rather than a public enemy.
Yeah, that's right. And then it became sort of nothing after that. And, you know, that's probably not a permanent situation. But so I don't know that it's that a huge amount of understanding has changed. I think it's more that just different priorities have come to the fore, right? And climate's a big part of it as well. Yeah. But I think one other thing that has changed a lot, or one thing that has changed a lot, I should say, is probably the way Muslims think about themselves in the context of politics. So, you know, one thing, and I will happily admit this is something that concerns me. I think for a lot of Muslims now, and certainly not all, like I'd say this is the minority of people who do this, but being a Muslim's become like a political identity rather than like a faith tradition that you know, something that you actually believe in and practice. And I think that's a little worrying because it becomes, you know, I sort of see this transformation of the category of being a Muslim into something that's the same thing as being, you know, a person of color, or and it's not actually the same. They're different things. You could be both, or you could be one and not the other, but they're not the same thing. But if you treat them as though they're the same thing, you apply the same sorts of ideas and so on. That sort of worries me because I think you can very quickly hollow out the things that are most definitive of Islam, and that is, like, you know, the religious and spiritual content of it. Of course. Which is kind of the point. Right? So I think that sort of thing's changed, and that's changed partly because a lot of Muslims end up, you know, especially more scholastic Muslims, they go to university, they might do arts degrees along with whatever else they're doing, and they pick up a lot of that sort of discourse and they want to apply it to being a Muslim. And I can understand how that happens and why that would be attractive, but I also think it's a mistake to do too much of that, or to go too far down that track. So I think that's probably been the bigger change than the other stuff, concerning the way that
more how we see ourselves and how
and again, it's not like a pervasive thing. It's not like every Muslim's doing that, and there's a certain generational element to it as well, but that's, in a weird way, that's probably the biggest change I've noticed.
No, having the religion kind of being part of your cultural and political identity rather than a backdrop of how you live your life. And something that also requires you to be something. Exactly.
And to do things.
I'm interested in your career path. So you mentioned how you know, when you were 10 you had a kind of an interest in the media, and then that faded away, and you know, you went into the law. How did you kind of transition back into that media side of things, and how much did Salam Cafe have to do with it?
It kind of had a fair bit to do with it at the same time as it didn't. It's a weird sort of situation. But my basic thing was I went to law school around the end, like September 11 happened when I was at uni. My second last year, I think. So by the time, that sort of changed the landscape a lot. And so I did become a little bit more interested in media then. Right. I started interested especially in writing. So I was really keen to write articles for like the uni magazine or whatever. But one day, it's actually an amazing story. You know, I've told this before, so I'll be brief about it. But on the day of September 11, so Tuesday, September the 11th, 2001, Richmond were training for a semi-final against Carlton here at Punt Road. And I went along to watch training. And then, of course, that night, the attacks happened. And then on the Saturday, we go to play Carlton at the MCG, and I'm reading the newspaper. And there's this article by a guy called Martin Flanagan, whose work I'd always loved. It was in The Age. And he started talking about the importance of like how it works that footy goes on and when tragedies just happened and all this sort of stuff. And he started talking about being at Richmond training on that Tuesday, and he describes what he saw, and he describes this Muslim family that he saw there. And immediately I recognise, it's like, oh my God, that's because I went with my sister-in-law and my nephews, and it's like, oh, he's just described us.
Yeah, that's remarkable.
And so I wrote to him. I just said, hey, you don't know me, but he actually wrote about me.
Yeah.
And I've always really loved your work, and I've kind of got an interest in writing and so on. And we had a chat, and he was really a great mentor for me, actually. And he told me, he was sort of the one who planted the idea in my mind that I might be able to write something, not for the uni magazine, but maybe for like The Age. Or it was like, that never occurred to me that would happen. So I became really interested in doing that. And at the time I got to the end of uni, I got my first piece published in The Age. It was in the Sunday Age, 24th of November 2002. I still remember it. And that was like the most exciting day. I mean, I went to bed, I couldn't sleep. I didn't sleep at all until I heard the paper get delivered. Yeah. And it hit the driveway, and I was like, oh my God, there it is. Look, like there's a thing out there on the driveway and my article's on it, you know. So I was really excited about that. And after that, I sort of developed a taste for writing for newspapers. It was really hard. It's very hard to get in, but I sort of kept persisting, and eventually it started happening. But so I became kind of interested in media around that time, but that was the first time really since I was a kid that had become, and I was getting to the end of my legal studies and what am I going to do next year? Anyway, so I applied for a legal job, but I also applied for a cadetship at The Age.
Oh, right.
And you know what happened? The cadetship at The Age was on the same day as grand final day. They had an exam, and it was on grand final day, so I just didn't go because I'd wanted to watch the grand final.
Really? Wow.
And I'd already been offered this job in the law, working in the family court. So then I just went there. So that's how I ended up doing law as opposed to media. Right. But in the meantime, because I was interested in this stuff, I just kept writing, and things just developed from there. At the same time as that, completely in parallel, I had a few friends over, we were playing board games or something at my house. And somehow the idea of, I wonder if we could get like a Muslim community show on community TV.
Ah, right.
And someone said, oh, okay, yeah, that's a good idea. I'll look into it. And he did. And then like within a day, he came back and said, oh, I looked into it. It's actually quite achievable. This is what we do. And I said, all right, well, let's just do it.
Yeah, all right.
So we did. So I think it might have been 2004. It started 2004 with a series called Ramadan TV. It was literally for 4 weeks. Yeah. That's it, just for Ramadan. Yeah. And we did it. And then the next year we did this thing called Salam Cafe. And we ran it for, I think, 3 seasons, and then SBS picked it up. And then, so that was kind of my first experience of doing TV. But it was kind of completely separate from the other stuff I was doing, which was the writing stuff. And as that was happening, people started noticing, like if you write enough articles, people start noticing. Yeah. And so I started getting asked to come in and do bits of radio and things like that. I started finding it easier to write in a lot of different platforms. And so they kind of both happened in parallel, until eventually the ABC in Melbourne started asking me to do fill-in shifts for John Fain, who at the time was hosting the morning show. It's like one of the most high-powered shows, and I was like, this is crazy, you're asking me to fill. I don't know how radio works, but I just sort of did it and got used to it, and it was just one thing led to another. So it had a lot to do with Salam Cafe in that was my introduction to TV, and there were things that came, like people noticed that and said, hey, would you like to come and try this, whatever. But the main thing was actually all the other stuff that began with my writing. And so that's why I say it kind of had a lot to do with Salam Cafe and also not to do with Salam Cafe at the time. But doing that TV was really useful because half the battle with TV is feeling comfortable and normal in that situation.
Yeah, right, with all the lights and everything.
Yeah, and talking to a camera. Like when you
Yeah.
stop and think about it, it's a really weird thing to do.
Oh, ridiculous.
Yeah,
even
humans shouldn't
doing,
be good at that.
Yeah, no, even doing a piece of camera, like
Yeah.
as a a news reporter.
Yeah.
Ridiculously strange experience.
It's very odd.
Yeah.
And to the point where I always found it quite an easy thing to do, and then I found that concerning. It's kind of like, what's wrong with you that you can actually talk to a camera and not find that a strange thing to do? There must be something messed up in your head.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, it was probably, that experience with community TV was great for that, and just having that experience. So my media career was in a way a bit of an accident. Like I was working in the law and I assumed that's what I was going to do. And eventually I got out of it, moved into academia, went and started a PhD and eventually did that. But like all these things were just happening at once. And the fact that I ended up with like working full time in media was like, that wasn't the plan. It just sort of happened. Because I think in media, one thing leads to another often. Not always, but that's the way it kind of works.
Yeah, opportunities kind of flow in that way.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. With your case obviously being, a brown Muslim face in the media.
Yeah.
In Australia, unfortunately, it's kind of the exception and not the rule. And Australia's an interesting country in that sense because obviously growing up, we're all raised to think, we're all, holding hands and singing Kumbaya, all the white, brown, Asian kids.
Yeah.
But in reality, it's not the case, especially when you kind of leave that school system and everyone finds their circles and you start realizing just how structured against people of, colour certain systems are, which is just the reality. I mean, like people will try and fight it, but it's just the case. So what do you think it is that holds Australia back in that sense? Whereas if you look at, the UK or the US, their morning shows, their equivalent of, Sunrise or whatever in Australia, they would have, a person of colour front and centre, probably on almost not every network, but, on a variety of networks. And that goes across, the UK and the US and Australia, which is a country that normally follows in those countries' footsteps, just hasn't done so in the media landscape.
Yeah, I mean, it is changing a little bit in Australia. I can say that because there's some data to demonstrate that, some of which hasn't been published, is about to come out, where they've done analysis.
That'd be an interesting read, yeah.
So it's starting to change in that way. But I would just caution against comparing Australia to the US or the UK as though they're the same, just in different places. We do have different histories,
Of course,
America, race is like, it comes to the fore in American politics in a way it doesn't really in Australia. And even though in Australia we do have this thing where it's becoming more of that, part of that is because a lot of Australians are beginning to think about Australia like Americans. That it's sort of importing American rhetoric and ideas and pushing in that way. But, America as a country had a civil war over slavery. It's it's a country that had the civil rights movement in the 60s because of things like segregation and all that sort of stuff. It's got an African-American population of, last time I checked, it was like 13%. I don't know exactly what it is now, but it would be about that. Its discourse on race is largely about actually Black America and not so much about Indigenous. I mean, it's a little bit, but I remember when I did a study tour of America once where this was kind of a common theme, and it was interesting how little any of it had to do with Indigenous Americans.
Right.
It was really all about African Americans, the slave trade, or the institution of slavery, the Civil War, etc. So I guess what I'm saying is that that's a different racial history, and it's different racial demographics, and it's different numbers, right? Here, race, I think, has become more an Indigenous conversation.
Yeah.
There you're looking at like 2%.
Yeah, as it should be, to be honest.
Well, yeah. But it's also then, alongside it, there's a multicultural conversation. But that's a different thing because that's recent migration.
Yeah.
You don't have anything quite like the Civil War where you had, some states imposing slavery and other states not, and them having a big fight about we don't have an equivalent of that in our history. We don't have an equivalent of the Civil Rights Movement. We don't have the same numbers or the same demographics. So that means that the relevance of race to our politics and the consciousness of race in the way we do social debate, the way we do politics generally is just, it's going to be different, right? And the UK is a little similar as well. I mean, the UK gives birth to the US, but also the UK's major hub for the transatlantic slave trade. There's huge populations of, from the Caribbean and etc. By the way, just on that, if you ever get the chance to watch Fire in Babylon, have you ever seen this? No. So it's a documentary, which I've heard people make some criticisms of, which seem fair enough, but it's such a gripping documentary about the rise of West Indian cricket.
Right. And
one of the things that was really interesting was the effect that the rise of West Indian cricket had on the Caribbean community in the UK.
Right.
This is an aside, but I'm just letting you know it's worth. No, it's really, really worth watching. It's really interesting. But I guess what I'm saying is that and then the UK becomes a colonial power and colonizes, Pakistan, India, North Africa,
half the world.
Yeah, right. And so a lot of the racial communities, or the ethnic communities in the UK, actually throughout Europe, you see this, especially places like France, they tend to be from ex-colonies, right? So like Algerians, Moroccans, like huge numbers in France.
Yeah, of course.
Less so in the UK. The UK is more Asian, right? Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi, etc. So you see. So I guess what I'm saying is, it's true that like the US and the UK deals with these things differently, and representation looks different, right? And seems more proactive and so on. And it's true that Australia lags behind in that regard, and it's true to say that that's lamentable. But I would just say let's be careful in assuming that it's just the same thing, but Australia's behind.
Yeah, in a different location.
It's also very different.
Yeah,
the histories are different and so on, and that creates different sort of situations, you know. And in a weird way, like my career, how would you interpret that? Would you say that it was just like an exception that proved the rule, or what, right?
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily know the answer to that. I could probably speculate with you for hours on it.
Yeah.
But
I'd say if I had to not hypothesize, but if I had to kind of surmise, I'd say you had to be, and this is not just to blow your balloon or whatever, but you probably had to be twice as intelligent or twice as hardworking to probably get to where you are.
Possibly,
as someone of your equivalent who's white.
Might, I don't know, but I mean, it's hard to say. Like, there are a lot of people I see my colleagues who are, I feel like every bit as intelligent.
No, of course. What I'm saying is, if you're
a stupid brown person doesn't make it. Maybe that's true.
Yeah.
Maybe that's true. But at the same time, I also feel like there was something kind of oddly Australian about the way that I ended up in the jobs that I ended up in, and that was, it just kind of happened in this informal way, by accident, a bit of right place, right time, sort of stuff. But also, I have to admit this, like I have the benefit of, I have all kinds of other benefits, right? I grew up in a highly educated middle class family in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne, and yes, I was in a racial minority, and there was mostly white kids around me, etc. But my brother studied medicine. I was at state schools most of my life, but the last 2 years I went to Wesley College, which was like that. That's that provides all kinds of networks and opportunities. So there are, yes, I have sort of racial disadvantages in a way, but I have other advantages, and these things are always really complex, right? They're always pulling in multiple directions, and so I guess, is it possible that my career is an Australian story that's different from an American one or a British one? Yeah, it maybe it is. I'd have to think about it in a bit more systematic detail, but
I'd love for there to be a project panel with 3 people of color, 2 2 white people. Like it'd be amazing.
I think that might have happened once, actually.
You, Nazim and Matt O'Kine?
No, you might have been me and Nazim, and I reckon there might have been like a Susie Youssef or whatever.
Yeah, right.
There's some weird thing like that.
But that'd be amazing if that was just the the normal pattern of behavior. Because like if you look around in an office, you're not seeing 95% white people and 5% minority.
That depends on the office.
Yeah, I know, right? But like just like if for example my office, right?
Yeah,
like if I walk around, here at Richmond, I'm seeing a lot of people of color.
Yeah.
Whereas if I turn on my TV, I'm just not.
Yeah, but you know what's interesting? If you walked around my office, I reckon you'd see 95% white people.
So
I think there's something about media.
That's in network television, though.
Yeah, sure. But I also think it's something about media generally, right? And it's slowly changing. Some of that is like, barriers. Some of that is cultural preferences, like, what do you mean you're going to go be a journalist?
Yeah,
go
right,
be a
right.
doctor?
Yeah, of course. In our culture, it's not the done thing to go into the media.
I always joke that, well, it's only half joking, because my brother's a surgeon, right? It's like, he's the good son and I'm the failure, right? And my dad always used to say to me, like, you're gonna have to have a real job, because this is not,
Yeah, I remember my dad saying.
Yeah, right.
Along those lines.
You know what I'm saying, right? So there's all kinds of factors, but it's interesting. Like what you've identified there is really interesting. That in a way, footy's doing something that, like, the media isn't. Our offices are quite different.
Yeah. I'd just love for that to change. I mean, I'd love for someone who's 10 years younger than me to be going into the media now and seeing that there are brown faces there for them to aspire to be like.
Yeah.
Or, there are no Asian people on TV. Like Southeast Asian people on TV. There's just none. Yeah. And it's just remarkable. If you're just a kid who's just come to Australia from China and isn't, going to private school and doesn't have those connections. Yeah. You think there's 0% chance that you'll ever make it to television? I think
I think that's probably right. Yeah. But I will say that's changing. Like you can see it in the cadetships and some of the people who are emerging is starting to enter the industry now. That's starting to change.
I agree that it's changing kind of behind the scenes. So The Age has, more minority writers. We had Sumaya Lambe on the podcast last season, and she's actually written the biography about Dan Andrews.
Right.
So that's not.
Oh, she's doing really well.
Yeah, exactly right, and that's not small fry. Yeah. Right, and that's a proud, hijabi Muslim woman. Yeah. And that's amazing. Like, I can't even explain how happy I was when I saw that. Right.
What is her background? Bosnian, Turkish?
She's Turkish. Yeah. And I was over the moon when I saw that. Yeah. But there's just not enough.
Yeah. But these things do happen slowly, right?
I understand what you mean about, colonialism and kind of the US and the UK feeling like they owe people that opportunity. I'm not sure if that's exactly.
But it's also numbers, right?
Yeah, right.
It's just the sheer weight of,
of course.
Of numbers that changes these things. Yeah.
It'd be great if, Waleed Aly wasn't the exception. If you didn't have to be the voice for Muslims on TV. Yeah.
Well, because that's not fair on anybody.
Exactly right.
That's not fair on Muslims who have to put up with me. And it's not
representing all of us.
Yeah, because that's not what I am, and it's not what I'm pretending to be either. Exactly. Like, I think it's a really important point, because sometimes I hear that sort of thing. It's like, what makes you representative? It's like, well, no, nothing. I'm not.
How do you actually? I know you're not on social media, which is amazing. Like, obviously, must help big time. But how do you kind of go about that? Like, not feeling like you've got the burden of a faith on you. Obviously, it's not like you've got, Bashar, Adam Saad.
Yeah.
A lot of Muslims that are out there and kind of showing a public face of Islam. Yeah. So just because you're on the project every night doesn't mean that you're the only Muslim that anyone's ever heard of.
Yeah, alhamdulillah, that's good.
Yeah, but still, like, and you have to speak about really touchy subjects, right? Yeah, it's not like Bashar, you can just speak about his premierships and then people will kind of not ask him about, political issues or race issues. And you have to speak about these things while also trying to represent Islam, which you shouldn't be. As we've covered, like, you shouldn't be. And ideally, there'd be another Muslim on there on the panel disagreeing with you. Yeah. And people see that there are Muslims with two different points of view. Totally, and that we're not all uniform.
Yeah. No, I think that's exactly right. As for your question of how do I handle that, I mean, I don't know, maybe in some ways you can't. You just have to do the best with what you got. Something. Because also you're fulfilling a number of roles, right? I'm not on air saying, "Hey, everybody, come check out Muslim and the ambassador from the Islamic embassy. That's not, people might read that sort of stuff into it. And I certainly am very open about the fact that I'm a Muslim. Like, that I'm not hiding it at all.
Tough to hide with a name like that.
Yeah, well, I guess so. But also, like, I'm a practicing Muslim. I'm not someone who I just happen to have that name or whatever.
Yeah, of course.
So I'm clear about that. But at the same time, I also have other roles that I have to fulfill. I'm, as a broadcaster, especially on a news type show, I'm a conduit between, for example, politicians and voters. And part of my job is to explore or interrogate issues so that when it comes, voters in a democratic society can make up their mind about things. And what that means is I will have to ask questions that come from a perspective that isn't actually my perspective, because it's not about me imposing my view of the world onto the audience.
Right.
It's about me facilitating the audience coming to their conclusions about things.
Yeah, because sometimes as a journalist, what you think doesn't actually matter.
It's irrelevant, yeah. And I think that gets overlooked a lot. It's one of the things that's frustrating, I guess, about the kind of work that I do. But like, people seem to not often. I'm generalising, obviously. Some people don't understand the difference between a statement and a question.
Yeah, right. Yeah. It's a good little bite-sized way of.
And it's important, right? So there might be a politician whose position is one that I agree with, but it's not my job to go out there and say, "Wow, how great is your position?" And now let's tell it. No, my job is to test the limits of that, so that people can make up their own mind, and also to understand that in the audience there's like a huge range of perspectives, and part of my job is to it's not as simple as this, but part of my job is to reflect those perspectives on a thing, right?
Yeah.
So that these different arguments, these different ideas get agitated and played out, in the public space. So that's the nature of the job, right? And so I guess when you've got all that happening, all you can do is turn up to work and play each ball on its merits, right?
Exactly right.
An issue comes before you or an interview comes before you, you do that. Also, you understand that, or I understand that my job is a tiny piece of the puzzle that makes up a whole show. So, I don't make the decisions about everything that appears on the show, nor should I.
You're not the producer.
No.
People don't actually realize that.
No, they don't.
There are producers that are actually running the show.
Yeah.
People think that the presenters just come on and decide exactly what they're going to talk about.
Yeah, and we have like input, and we might even be more influential than other people, but we certainly, I can't just veto things,
Exactly right. Yeah.
And I can't just decide that things are happening. That's not the way it works. And then you add to that, it's a panel show. So I'm just one of, how many people, and there's all these different perspectives that come together. So, yeah, I mean, all of these things are, what do you say? They're all balancing acts, I guess.
Yeah, right.
And I don't try or pretend, and I've never claimed this for myself, that I represent a whole group of people or a whole religious tradition or something. Like, I can't do that. All I can do is, is do the best I can, with what I have in the situation that I'm in, which is like anybody else.
Yeah, exactly right. I'm conscious of time, so I've got a couple more questions.
Oh, sorry, have I?
That's okay. No. It's your time more than mine. You've got there was an incident I remember where there was a rule change in the AFL. And you were consulted on it.
Oh God, I remember this story.
Yeah. And white people didn't take it too well.
Yeah, but
some people didn't understand why Waleed Aly, media presenter / lawyer / academic, is being consulted on this. Yeah. And you're obviously a huge sports fan.
Yeah.
And I actually wrote about this at the time.
Oh, right. I'm sorry that I wasted your time with
it. I'll take that back now. And I remember saying that. I remember there was a specific tweet that said, I won't say any names, but there were essentially 3 white names and then your name, and said, someone doesn't belong in this list for who was consulted on this.
Right.
And I wrote in no uncertain terms, and this is for a very it's not a black publication or a Muslim publication. I wrote that the only reason why he doesn't belong on this list is because of his name,
Right.
and it's not and because 2 of the other people on there weren't actually sports personalities at all, right? So my question to you is, when something like that happens, do you feel the need to kind of come out and say, look, I know more about this than you think, or or something along those lines, because I know obviously you're not on social media, you can't tweet about it.
Yeah. Well, it wouldn't be helpful if I did.
Yeah, no, it wouldn't be. Of course not. Of course, I don't think anything's ever been helped by someone tweeting about something. But yeah, like how does that kind of come across to you when things like that happen? Because again, we spoke about it earlier, right? You're the exception, right? Like you're in the media as one of the only people of color on there. So how does that make you think, wow, like I really am kind of on an island here, or do you I don't want to put words in your mouth.
There are times where it does, definitely, and there are times where it doesn't. I remember that episode. I mean, what was weird about that episode, I thought, apart from anything else, was the use of the word consult. Like I felt like, it's kind of an overstatement. Like what I was doing was I went to a briefing because they arranged one, and I went and got briefed on it because I work in media and I need to know about this stuff. Right. So, and then in the course of that, they would say something and I would go, yeah, but what about X or what about Y or whatever? But that's me trying to understand the issue. So it wasn't me saying, all right, I'm going to come in and I'll just leave it to me, guys. I'll rewrite the rules of Australian rules football. That's not what was going on. And the background was interesting because it happened because Nicole Livingston was on the project one night. And I think at the time, I can't remember what specific role she had at the AFL. Now she's doing AFLW, but I think this might have been before that. Anyway, I'm not entirely sure. And I was just goading her, saying, so tell me what's happening with the rule changes. You're going to tell me about that. Yeah. And in trying to get her to tell me something she shouldn't be telling me, right? Like inside information, which is my job, right?
Yeah.
And she did her job and said, no, I can't tell you that. She said, but what I can do is, if you want, I can arrange a briefing so you can hear it from them and whatever. And so she arranged that. So all of that was perfectly normal. If they had the time and they were prepared to brief someone who, I do appear on a sports show. This stuff could potentially come up on any number of the things I'm doing. Yeah. That's just normal. So what was interesting was the way it got reported. And I did speak to the journalist later about it, and I think he was caught off guard by the way it got used. I wasn't, but he kind of was. But yeah, that those sort of moments, they feel horrible. In fact, I remember the day that happened. I'm almost certain it was Eid al-Adha, right? Because I went to do an interview with Gerard Whateley that morning to try to explain what had happened. And I think I came either after or immediately before the Eid Salat. So, I remember it intensely, and I remember that sort of horrible feeling that it's almost like it pervades your whole body, where it's almost like you're being feasted on, that sort of feeling. It is a horrible feeling. But as far as saying anything about it, I don't know. I've been thinking a lot about these sort of things lately. And I think for a Muslim audience, it's especially important to remember that we are Muslims, and if this is what Allah has planned for us, then that's what it is, right? And you've got to be very careful that you don't respond to these things through nafs. Yeah. And one of the things about the nafs is that it wants to defend itself. Yeah. The bigger the ego, the more instantaneous and vociferous your defense of yourself will be, because you can't cope with the possibility that... Yeah. And so I've been thinking a lot about that. And I fail at this a lot, but I think about not defending myself, because that opens the door to something that's far more serious than who said what to whom about the rules of the AFL. That's about my own state, right? Like the things that for Muslims at least should really matter. And it's a tricky thing to do when you're in a public role, but it's something, even when I fail in that regard, at least I can be conscious that I failed in it. Do you know what I mean? And so that was an example, not so much that I approached that example that way, because I just didn't respond. There was nothing to respond to, really. Like, how could I? What could I? And what on what platform and all that.
Yeah.
But it's something to bear in mind that sometimes the desire to defend yourself is not a desire that you need to give into.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's a great point, and especially in this day and age of social media where every action needs to have a reaction.
Totally.
Yeah. It's a great point that.
And everyone has to say something all the time.
Exactly, you have to have a say on everything.
Yeah.
If something's said about you, you have to respond, and it's an never-ending cycle.
Yeah.
But yeah, look, we'll leave it there. We can talk for hours. But I think we'll wrap it up there. It has been fascinating. So thank you so much for coming on.
Waleed, thank you for having me.
No worries.
Assalamu
alaikum. And thank you all for listening to this episode of BHF Talks. Inshallah, we have many more exciting guests to come on in the remaining episodes of this season. And until next time, Assalamu alaikum.